Hello, everybody. I thought I'd come in and meet with everybody for a little while today. I am not a person who goes to meetings much anymore. Not that I don't find them useful or think that they're a good idea. It just isn't part of my normal routine. Whether that people think that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's what has worked for me for the last few years. I'm not saying that meetings weren't important or weren't a big part of my life at one time, but that currently they're not something that I do very often. So part of when I was using, I was a person who was in isolation. I didn't like to use or to drink with anybody. I didn't use with anybody because the idea of sharing as a heroin addict is frightening. And I didn't really drink around other people because I was such a mess that either people really didn't want to be around me, or I just knew that being in public or being around other people almost always caused more problems than just to isolate. So this is kind of, if there are other people who are like me, and maybe even people who go to meetings regularly, but they just find that coming into this live chat is something that they enjoy, sorry about that. I'd appreciate having you here. I am a heroin addict and an alcoholic. I wouldn't always when I would go to meetings, especially the ones that don't focus particularly on alcohol, I was the person who would say I am an addict and an alcoholic. And I had a person remark that was redundant, because being an addict includes, it's all encompassing. And even my sponsor, Uncle Steve, agreed that it was redundant to say that you're an addict and an alcoholic. But what I found was that, not that saying it would necessarily, words have a lot of power. We know that. So every time that I forgot that I was an alcoholic, I'd use heroin and usually end up drinking as soon as I ran out. And every time that I forgot I was an addict, or not forgot, but just decided I'm not an addict, or excuse me, an alcoholic, that I would drink. And then that almost always led to going out and scoring some heroin. I was talking a bit about gratitude yesterday, and I'd kind of like that to be part of the talk too today. Yesterday I was having kind of a down in the dumps day, and realizing that even though things are bad, because I've been able to structure, somewhat of a routine, that when I'm having a bad day, I don't immediately resort back to what I used to do, which was get loaded. And when I'm having a bad time, there are people I talk to There, I was able to come on and do a live stream, get out of myself, get out of the echo chamber, which I've talked about, my own ideas bouncing in my own head, my own resentment, going on and on and on in my own head is getting out of that. And not staying in an unhealthy place. I didn't necessarily feel that I was in an unhealthy place, but whenever you're resenting too much, it's not a great place to be. It's not a very comfortable place to be. In leading up to getting sober this last time, I'd been in treatment and detox 10 times each. And I always found myself saying, just one last time. And another echo chamber I got into was when I had a time of sobriety and I decided, I talked myself into one more night, one more time, whether it was drinking or whether it was shooting heroin, taking a handful of pills, whatever it was, setting up the mood. I'm going to watch Terminator 2. I'm going to play some Call of Duty. I'm going to get loaded just this one night, and I'll never tell anybody about it. And usually I was going to meetings at the time, or I had a sponsor at the time. And rigorous honesty is not planning such events, is not, those are that, having that idea and planning that one more night is exactly why I needed to be talking to people. I needed to be telling people about those things that were going on in my head, my echo chamber, because in my own echo chamber, I could bounce that around and around and around and justify it until it was done. And then continuing the echo chamber with thinking that I was never going to tell anybody, that I would be able to keep that a secret. And there is, when you develop tissue dependence, when your body is accustomed to whatever substance you've been using, so when you stop using it, you go into withdrawal. There's a short time for addicts and alcoholics who've had some sobriety. Before that, you have some time in there. So, but in order to get to the, in order to stay away from that, if one more time actually worked, then it would just be one more time, but it never was for me. And I always found myself that one more time, well, it's Friday night. I've got Saturday and Sunday I can use on Saturday. Sunday to recoup. Monday, back at it like nothing happened. And in the many times that I did this little experiment, Monday would come, even if I took Sunday off and, took that time to straighten out again. It was usually at least by Tuesday, I was back to doing what I was doing and developing tissue dependence and the road to withdrawal almost automatically every time. For me, that's how it went down every time. And how many more times, I started thinking about how many more times could there be one last time? If it's truly one last time, and if we didn't need any help, and if we could do this on our own, then one last time would actually be one last time. But it just doesn't work out that way. And in using, well, a lot of people will start to sober up, and they'll go to a meeting or two, or whatever group they're going to, or meeting with a counselor. And after a time or two, and they're like, I didn't really get anything out of it. Yeah, I went to a meeting. I or met with a counselor, or I talked with another person about it, and I just didn't get anything out of it. And as a using person, as a drug addict, as an alcoholic, if I'd applied that principle to my drinking and using, things would have been a lot different. Because every time you go out to score, doesn't always happen on the first try. Sometimes you walk a block, but you have to walk another block in order to find a dude holding. And people who go to meetings once or twice, I meet with a counselor once or twice, and they're like, I didn't get anything. I didn't really get anything out of it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I ask, well, what? And I had to ask myself this because I felt that way. I would go to meetings, but I wasn't really getting anything out of it. But what was I putting into it? Was I getting numbers? When I did get numbers, did I call anybody back? Did I read the book? Did I follow the suggestions from the counselor, or did I just go to the meeting and think that that was going to be it? And after having gone to meetings, gotten the sponsor, worked the steps, over a long period of time, I did fourth and fifth steps more than once in this last time getting sober, and did my amends. My list I would scratch things off and remember other things that I realized that I wanted to take amends with. And the books usually talk about that. This isn't just going to be a one-time thing, but a lifetime thing. And that's definitely, it's been almost 4 years for me, and that's definitely been true. There are constantly things that I'm finding that I need to make amends for. And we do have to, when we're considering making amends, there are suggestions on when it is appropriate. And we shouldn't just be making amends in order to make ourselves feel better, especially if making that amends or telling the truth about something in particular is going to devastate somebody else or alter their life. That might be something that's just best left between the person and the sponsor and just getting honest about it. But like I said earlier, their words are important. Words are powerful. And saying out loud the things that we've done is almost as important, and sometimes is as important as actually making an amend or restitution. And when I meet people who are new into the program, I do hear them talk about going to meetings and not really getting anything out of it. And I ask, well, did you talk in the meeting? No. Did you talk to anybody after the meeting or get a number? A lot of times in meetings too, if you're willing to say, hey, I'm a new person, they'll send around a thing with a meeting list with sort of a schedule of meetings for the week or the month. And a lot of times some of the people who've been there a while will write their phone numbers on there. And if we were out looking to score and a dude that we got some decent stuff from gave us their number and we were looking to score again, we'd call them. Or we'd go to the house, or we'd go to the same place. We'd go to where we met them before, because we're rewarded for it. We get something out of it because we put something into it, because we went and we sought it out. If we were able to just stay in our house, and I know with now there's weed delivery and they'll bring booze to your house, and a lot of drug dealers will deliver. But for the most part, it's a matter of action. It's a thing that requires us to do something. And the same is true of sobriety. If we want to stay sober, there are things that we're likely to have to do. Not all the time. There are people, and God bless them, that just say, you know what, this is enough of this baloney and I'm done. And they're done. they have that one more time moment, which is possible, and for them it's over, and they go on with their life and clean up what mess they have, and on they go. For me, that wasn't the case. I had to go through, however many decades of going back and forth and refusing to let God in my life as I understand him, what I understand God, Jesus. And when we refuse to work any steps, or we refuse to talk to other people, or get out of our echo chamber and tell people about those things that are bouncing around in our heads that are unhealthy, when we refuse to do those things, then we're stuck in the same routine of drinking and using. And if we're willing to go, like a lot of them in the beginning of the meetings, part of it is if you, and they state it really simply, you see people who've been there a while. I had a sponsor, and he had 24 years at the time. And I was like, man, wow, 24 years, how does that work? And he's like, well, it took 24 years. And there's nothing more true than that. It took him 24 years of doing the things that were necessary in order to stay sober. Just as when we're loaded, we do the things that are unnecessary, and many of those are uncomfortable and dangerous sometimes, and humiliating and disappointing to our loved ones. But we do those things in order to stay loaded. As we're getting sober, things are uncomfortable. Sometimes they make people upset, but usually it's on a path to personal redemption that people will get upset with you. You're making your amends, and you have to take. I had to take some people chewing me out, and some people not responding, and some people being very welcoming and lovely. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't until I stopped refusing to let God in my life as I understand him. It wasn't until I stopped refusing to actually do the work that was going to be necessary in order to stay sober. And it wasn't until I was willing to, if you want what we have to offer, which is the people who go to meetings and they seem happy and they seem like they're having a good time, or at least better. They may not be happy and having a good time, but they at least seem better than than how we're feeling when we're new and we go into a meeting. Beat up. And we see people who are less beat up, and they seem to be getting along all right, and they're sober. And they'll say, if you want what we have to offer, sobriety, something a little bit better than where we're at the minimum, if you want what we have to offer and are willing to go to any length to get it. That's the key. Are we willing to go to any length to get it? And it took me a long time of thinking that I just had it all figured out, that they talk about that terminal uniqueness. And I had that because I figured that it was, a lot of people have to do all those other things, but I'm just going to show up and it'll work. And it didn't. For me, it didn't. And there is a better life. And there is a promising future. And my life isn't always awesome, but it's way more awesome than, not to say that, drinking and using, there aren't good times, but the good times are usually at the beginning, and then they're dispersed throughout occasionally, and otherwise for me it was a bunch of weird relationships and disappointing a bunch of people and just feeling like S most of the time. All I did was I punched a clock to work when I was able to work, when I was coherent enough to work, when I wasn't too much of a mess to work, or I punched the clock for dope or booze. And eventually it would all crash and burn. Detox, treatment, explaining to everybody how I was never going to do anything. I was never going to do this again if they just give me one more chance. And they did. Many one more chances. And usually when they did and the work part came up, and it came to me having to live up to what I just said, give me one more chance and I'll do whatever it takes. I wouldn't do whatever it took. And again, the cycle of disappointment and starting again from zero. And you usually got lower and lower and lower every time. And for me, the breaking point was not necessarily this last time. I still had an apartment, I still had a job, but I thought that I had lost my mind. I'd been drinking really heavily and decided to just stop. Bad idea. If you've been drinking heavily, don't just stop cold turkey. If you've been taking pharmaceuticals, specifically antidepressants, things that are prescribed to you, or benzodiazepam, Librium, Ativan, Valium, things like that, and you've been using them for a while, don't just stop anything cold turkey like that. It can be really dangerous. I know firsthand, and I'm sure you've heard stories, and there are the few things that they'll tell you, quitting cold, the only detox that you can really die from, alcohol and benzos. And, the last time I stopped was doing what I usually did, going from either opiates or alcohol, going from opiates to alcohol. This time for me it was opiates to alcohol. Ran out of opiates, ended up drank my face off for a couple of weeks. And after having been sober for a while, and decided to just quit, and went into DTs, the delirium tremens, which are not. I thought they were a folksy thing. I didn't really realize what they were until I started having them for a couple of days, and I really thought that I'd lost my mind. That was the bottom. Was that I thought that I had broken from reality. I thought that I had. I thought that people talk about a psychic change in the doctor's opinion as being a good thing when you go from the person who's focused on drinking and using to a person who's focused on sobriety. And I thought I'd had a psychic change that had altered me in some way and that I wasn't going to be able to get back. And that really scared the S out of me. And for almost 4 years, I haven't drank or used again. And it took a month or 6 weeks before I was like, okay, I might not have completely destroyed my brain, and I may have a few marbles left. And and at this point, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Fortunately, as time has gone on, the hard work at the beginning, the hard work of sobriety at the beginning, not saying that there's any less work to do, but it's not as hard anymore. It's more of a routine. It's more of a thing that I find joy in, and I'm grateful to do the things that I do now. And don't think about getting loaded beyond just a thing that I used to do and as a danger of what could be if I were to make that decision to go down that road again. So, well, look, I really appreciate if you took the time to watch this. I see I have a couple of subscribers. I sincerely appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you.